For this year's general election, registered voters need to watch for their ballots arriving by mail in mid-October.
Following the instructions, seal your ballot in the envelope provided and be sure to sign the back.
Envelopes without your signature will not be accepted.
Look for your free elections guide in the newspaper or at these locations statewide.
There are no polling places.
So be sure to mail your ballot by October 27th.
Hawaii votes by mail.
Well, happy Aloha Friday. It is October 9th. I'm Ryan Kalesuji, joined by Yunji Denise. This is Spotlight Hawaii, a conversation that is brought to you by the Office of Election that reminds you that ballots are on their way out and to encourage people to go out there and vote. Yunji, I got mine. I voted. I just have to drop this in the mail. I know
I'm so excited. I haven't filled mine out yet, but I did get it, and I'm very excited to fill it out. And as that commercial said, October 27th, of course, the general election is not until November, but they want to give the post office enough time to get those ballots where they need to be.
That's right. So we encourage you to don't wait. Go ahead and fill that out and send it in. And of course, there are other opportunities and ways that you can vote. You can visit the election website for more information on that. Today, Yanchi, we have yet another special guest to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and as the state prepares for that October 15th reopening plan.
Yeah, that is just next week. Hawaii will open to trans-Pacific travel, though depending on which island you are on, how you welcome guests will look different. John DeFries is joining us this morning. He is the new president and CEO of the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and he is the man who is going to be shepherding Hawaii and when it comes to tourism in this very challenging time. Thank you so much for being here this morning. First off, I mean, what a time to start this job. Is Hawaii ready for the influx of tourists that is expected next week?
You know, the industry has worked hard in advance of my arrival here 3 weeks ago to prepare itself. Each segment from airlines to airport, ground transportation, hotels, restaurants, retail, activities, all of them have established industry guidelines, primarily through their trade associations, some of them national and some of them local. And those are all posted on the Go Hawaii website if anyone is interested. They serve as baseline standards upon which I expect individual businesses to continue to work to exceed those guidelines, because ultimately the safety of the local workforce and the local work environments, regardless of what business you're in, is essential to gaining the trust and confidence of the visitor, and more importantly, or as importantly, have the confidence and trust of those who work in those environments as well. But the date's been set. The industry has been actively working toward that. But I need to emphasize that nothing stops on the 15th. There'll be continued refinements on ways in which to ensure safety and health moving forward over the next several months.
You know, as Angie kind of alluded to, each island is sort of opting in for or opting out in some ways of their own plan. Can you sort of give us a breakdown of what that looks like right now at this moment? We know that talks are continuing with the governor and the mayor, but if you can sort of give us a layout of what that looks like for each of those neighbor islands and how they will be welcoming back guests, or if they won't be.
You know, and this situation is so fluid that I run the risk of my information being somewhat dated, even though it might be 10 hours old. My understanding is Mayor Kim on Hawaii Island is still considering the opt-in, opt-out, or what a conditional opt-in might look like. My latest understanding is Mayor Victorino on Maui is prepared to move forward with the state's plan. And then I was just handed a press release about 10 minutes ago from the island of Kauai, where they have established and adopted a tier system that mirrors that of Oahu and what Mayor Caldwell has done. And in that tier system, there are specific daily averages of COVID cases that would trigger a opt-out of it. And so, that is the differences between the islands at this point. Let me also emphasize one thing. There are 5 CEOs that are critical to remain focused on. One's the governor, and 4 are the county mayors. These CEOs have specific points of focus on the health and well-being of their islands. And so the fact that we're opening what appears to be in a somewhat disjointed manner should not be disruptive to our viewers, because these mayors in particular have a granular understanding of the capacity on their island to manage COVID. And so I'm respectful of that. You know, these mayors and counties are not extensions of tourism. We are extensions of them. And so as they make their decisions, HTA will move into alignment and support the decisions that they've made.
You know, we always like to bring in the audience, and Daphne has a question. She says, how are tourists going to be treated once we get there? I don't want to spend a lot of money to get there, and then we are not wanted by the locals. I think one of the things that makes Hawaii so special is our aloha spirit. And we did see at the start of the pandemic that there were some people who were not treated very nicely in Waikiki, visitors who were basically threatened. And you know, there is this sort of trepidation with people coming from outside, from places that might have high COVID counts. So how do we manage this part of welcoming visitors back?
You know, we're about to find out. Frankly, until we have a vaccine and we've been able to fully stabilize the situation, every decision that's being made by the governor or the mayors will be controversial. You're going to end up there's an inherent polarity in our community between those that are pro-business and those who are not. And even amongst that polarity, there is, what they have in common is a concern about the quality of life and well-being of our communities. But the dialogue and the debate between this is, on the pro-business side, it's going to look like we're moving too slow. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's going to look like we're moving too fast. Relative to the question that Daphne has raised, however, I expect that the visitor who arrives on October 15th and the 2 months that take us into the Christmas holidays, that they will know that the experience of their vacation or their stay in Hawaii is going to be very different from anything they've experienced before. You will have sectors that are open and closed. Your favorite restaurant may not be operational at this time. So my sense about the people that will invest in a trip is that there's some other reason that they're compelled or motivated to come. It could be relationships, friendships. Frankly, it could just be a walk in nature that would make them feel revitalized. But relative to the way they're treated, again, you've got local folks who are excited to be back at work. And you're always going to have local folks that feel that this is just moving too fast. And we're going to have to try our best to try and find some semblance of harmony between that. It won't be easy, but we'll find a way.
You know, during this time, we've heard a lot of talk by officials in the tourism industry, as well as elected officials who have come on this program, who talked about this as an opportunity to redefine what tourism looks like in Hawaii, to maybe minimize the amount of visitors that come in so we don't see that 10 million visitor numbers that we saw last year, and looking for maybe a higher spending type of visitor. How does that look like? And how does that, I guess, equate into the marketing and targeting specific audiences and groups of people? I mean, it's easy to, I guess, say that we're going to go after a different type of visitor, but realistically, as a head of this tourism authority, how do you change that in marketing and landscape to achieve some of those goals?
You know, you have to look at the product, right? And the product, the spectrum of the visitor industry product based on price points is fairly wide. So you can move from hostels to, you know, a 5-star hotel within that full inventory. So the idea of focusing on high spending visitors has been around for several years. And frankly, I struggle with the fact, only because we have product line of hotels that are 2-star, 3-star hotels that are designed and operate to cater to a certain clientele. I will tell you from my own experience, right? I started in this industry back in the mid-70s. And time again, I would, as a tour director, and I would live with these visitors for like a week to 2 weeks. And time after time, I would hear people talk to me about how they would save $500 a year for the dream vacation. And 35 years later, after raising a family, after working their farm, after driving their trucks, all of that, they finally got to a point where they could afford the dream vacation to Hawaii. And so who am I to say you're no longer welcome because it's been your dream for 35 years, but we've now pivoted to a different client. I just don't see that happening. I see the importance of getting the higher spending visitor, but I also see the importance of mixing that client base in accordance with the product lines that we have to offer.
Well, going to Ryan's point of the 10 million, obviously we're not going to get anywhere near that for this year. I've heard a lot of leaders say that they're anticipating a trickle of tourists. Do you have any idea of, I mean, are there any projections in terms of how many visitors will actually come to our shores on October 15th and toward the end of the year through the holiday season?
So every one of us that attempts to forecast this is literally pulling it out of the air, right? I've been asked this question, and then you're going to check me on this, but between October 15th and New Year's Eve, when we look at just those 2.5 months, my estimate is we're going to have a daily average of about 5,000, which is roughly 17% of what that daily average was a year ago. And I feel like it's a small enough place to start so that we can perfect the systems that will protect the health and well-being of the workers and the work environment and the host environment that will host the guest. I know the Lieutenant Governor has extended that range to about 8,000 a day, but literally a couple of factors to remember. Federal subsidies to airlines, domestic airlines, concluded on October 1. This is going to cause airlines to reduce the number of routes. There's going to be substantial layoffs that have already been announced. And a destination is wholly reliable like ours on the lift capacity or the number of air seats. Now, the airlines are prudent in their reduction of routes and the workforce, but I also know that they're extremely prepared to add to that as the demand calls for it, because there's a perception that there's a pent-up demand. I expect the airlines to be extremely responsive to that. And but right now, you know, if somebody asked me, I'd say that a daily average of 5,000 is probably where we're going to end up. And again, that's totally pulled out of the air.
We understand. We won't hold you accountable to that. We understand this is a very fluid situation.
What if I'm accurate, though?
I know. There you go. Even better. Another, of course, large segment of tourism has obviously been the international travel and the lift that comes in from other markets aside from just the continental U.S. And we've heard early on during these discussions about these travel bubbles and these other partners in other countries. We heard the governor briefly speak about some of these earlier this week when we spoke to him. But I'm wondering if you could tell us sort of the status on, say, the relationship right now with Japan and opening up, a way for Hawaii visitors to head to Japan and vice versa. Is that continuing to move forward? And what does that look like at this point in time?
You know, I spoke last week to officials in Japan with the help of our bureau, which is Hawaii Tourism Japan. One of the first priorities is to get the test, the pre-travel test in Japan, which doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, but it needs to be deemed acceptable. My understanding right now, and this has been diligent work behind the scenes between Hawaii Tourism Japan, and I want to call out and acknowledge House Speaker Saiki Scott Saiki, who has relationships with legislators in Japan. Everyone's been working to get this test approved and recognized by the State Department of Health. And then the State Department of Health is forced to comply with the FDA emergency use authorization. So I expect those tests to be accepted if that documentation hasn't already happened. But it's been a work in progress intently for about the last 2 weeks and the last 3 days in particular. So once that is established, that's a key component to opening Japan. The next thing is making it readily available in Japan is another challenge that they're going to be faced with. But again, in speaking to the Japan travel officials last week, there's an eagerness for the Japan traveler to return. And we're picking up that same kind of intensity from South Korea, as well as from Oceania and our bureau that's based in Australia. So Japan will probably, of the international markets, be first to respond, but I expect that each of those tests are basically certified and deemed to be acceptable by our State Department of Health, that those markets will begin to respond as well.
You know, if 5,000 is the sort of projection at the moment, 5,000 daily arrivals, and that is a small percentage of what we had before, how do we really measure success in this regard? How do we, what is our goal in terms of arrivals? And also, to know that this pre-travel testing program is actually working. The Lieutenant Governor and others have said that they do expect some positive cases to come through. But, I'm just wondering what the benchmarks are for you when you look at this program.
Let me reframe that a bit and then come back to it. The most important thing that I believe we as a statewide community and as a island society, the most important thing that we can do is commit to flattening the COVID curve permanently, and do that with a different mindset and do it in a proactive way. At some point, there's going to be a vaccine that will allow us to keep that curve flattened permanently. And that vaccine, depending on who you listen to, could be 9-12 months away, okay? Waiting for the vaccine is not an option in my mind. And as a community, the reason this is so important is that in order for industries like tourism to reopen over the next 3 to 5 years at scale, we're going to have to keep this curve flattened and make that a common vision, common mission for the entire state. When I applied in early July for this position at HTA, Hawaii was among the top COVID statistics in America. By the time I got to the final interview 8 weeks later, we were among the worst COVID statistics, and it had little or nothing to do with tourists. As local people, we got complacent, we took our eye off the goal, and we may have even underestimated the virus, and in some circles acted reckless. So that most recent spike was self-induced. Unless we commit to flattening the curve permanently, what you're going to find is we're going to open for 4 weeks and close for 2 weeks. Then we're going to open for 5 weeks and close for 2 weeks. And that pattern is totally unacceptable. It's not going to help anyone. It's going to lead to layoffs, rehires. More importantly, it's going to send a mixed message to the markets. So we need to make a cohesive effort to do this, because once we do that, then we can begin to understand and forecast and then begin to measure our success. The biggest measure of success for me right now would be if by Christmas Day, 100 days from now, we have flattened the curve permanently.
To that regard, we recognize with those numbers that obviously we're not going to be able to have that large influx, that it will be sort of a trickle in of visitors. From the hospitality standpoint and the hotels that you represent and you're talking to within the Hawaii Tourism Authority, how are they going to be able to operate knowing that it is going to be a slow start? Do we expect to see some of these hotels continue to stay closed? And what will that look like for many who probably won't be able to continue on services with maybe 25% of capacity filled or whatever that number may be? How are the hotels planning for this?
We should emphasize that not every business, not every hotel will open on October 15th. Some will take a wait and see attitude. Others I've talked to have accelerated their renovations programs that might have been set for the year 2021 or 2022, and using this window of uncertainty to do construction or reconstruction and improvements. Of the hotels that will open, I expect them to open sections of their hotel and keep wings or keep certain floors completely closed to minimize the need for maintenance. So, the hotelier in October 15th can open 25-30% of their hotel inventory and then adjust that inventory accordingly, right? Now, at those levels, it is unlikely that any of them can break even operationally at that level. So, but it's an entry point that the operators hope will lead to a steadily increase of confidence within the workforce, confidence within the markets that can actually allow them to start expanding their inventory, expanding their occupancy, and deriving, better average rates for it. So, but it's going to be a process, and it's going to take time for us to do that.
I'm interested to know, just from a marketing standpoint, who HTA is targeting as the ideal visitor. Obviously Hawaii had a breadth of different kinds of visitors, but we were a large family market, especially around the holidays. And, I would imagine that it is more challenging to bring a family of 4 here with the COVID testing requirements and trying to get, a minor tested. Anyone over the age of 5 obviously has to get that test. So who are you hoping actually does come and visit right now?
There's the Hawaii Visitors Bureau, Visitors and Conventions Bureau, has access to a number of national surveys, and as our international marketeers have to their specific market segment. And so what they're looking at are survey or data that has to do with kind of the mindset of the traveler, that ranges from being absolutely fearful to get on an aircraft, and the opposite end of the spectrum being that I can't wait to get to Hawaii, and I know I need to act responsibly by wearing a mask and paying attention to the hygiene and social distancing. So inside those surveys that are pretty specific and they get updated periodically, you begin to see certain types of travelers that the most recent one I saw favors those that enjoy the outdoors, right? And outdoor experiences. And so you're going to see a high emphasis on catering to those that are a bit more adventurous, very responsible, sensitive to community and culture. And all of those kinds of demographics have all been assessed. And so when you look at the Bureau advertising, especially in the spots that are targeting the way in which you conduct yourself once you come to Hawaii, it's going to appeal to a certain segment of people. I don't expect a whole rash of families to immediately jump it because of the tests that you were referring to. But there are specific segments of the market that we feel will be more responsive, and the more adventurous, the more outdoors oriented are probably the ones that we're going to see first here.
Our time is sort of wrapping up here, and we did get a few questions that have been coming in a little bit later, and so they may have missed the beginning. But if we can maybe expand on the question of inter-island travel and the Kama'aina, I guess, economy. There's a lot of people here on each of the islands that would love the opportunity to visit the neighbor islands and to be able to have a weekend getaway on another island, perhaps. And so for you in leading this organization, how important is establishing that that travel between inter-island and allowing for maybe locals to visit and the quarantines and all these rulings that are set up in each island? But how important is that to get set up to allow for this inter-island travel to once again be somewhat normalized?
Like in my case, my primary residence was Kona, and I'm trying to transition to Honolulu. And my wife hasn't been able to make a trip with me because when she goes back to Kona, she would be subject to a 14-day quarantine, right? So, I think it's a huge priority that our local residents are given equal, in fact, more than equal consideration on traveling inter-islands. I mean, with the attention being paid to the out-of-state visitor, I understand from an economic recovery standpoint, but the fact that our local population is having to live with certain restrictions doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense not only to me, the governors and mayors are trying to sort that out themselves, because this one question keeps coming up at every juncture, as it should. And I'm hoping that we get to a resolution on this and that the Kama'aina travel can be restored within the context of the safety standards that are being done. But to hold them to a 14-day quarantine when they just want to go over and see grandma on Kauai or their daughter on the Big Island is something that we really need to get a better handle on, and we don't have it at this time. But we'll continue to work on it.
Okay, well, as Ryan said, our time is wrapping up, so we'd love a final thought from you. We are looking at next week. It'll be here before you know it, and those visitors will start arriving. So what's your final message to our audience today?
That is next week. My message really goes out to our local workers in the industry. When you were laid off in March from your job, and now you're being hired back for this reopening, keep in mind it's not the same job. It's everything it was in March, plus this whole new category and echelon of responsibility having to do with hygiene, sterilization, and sanitation that heretofore was reserved for clinics and hospitals. It's a whole new industry, and it requires a whole different approach and mindset. And I'm confident that our local people will be able to make that adjustment, but that is a shift in what was once a job that you may have had 6 months ago, 1 year ago. So I wish all of them extremely good fortune in making this transition, and appreciate all the help. Thank you.
John DeFries, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us. We know you're a busy man with a lot of things that are happening around this opening, but we certainly appreciate you taking the time to give us an update and to share your mana'o with us this morning. Mahalo.
I look forward to getting my voice back too. So thank you.
You did great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Well, interesting to see, Ryan. They're still working out a lot of the details. 10 minutes before we started our interview with him, as he said, Kauai released their announcement saying that they are going to participate in the travel pre-testing program with some serious reservations, setting out some thresholds for the number of cases that they'll accept before they lock it back down. So it will be different island to island, but it will start next week, and we do anticipate arrivals. He said up to 5,000 a day is what they're anticipating to start.
Yeah, and again, that was his number that he said he was sort of pulling from the sky. Of course, we were hearing different numbers and calculations, and it's very difficult to predict what that number exactly will look like. But as you did mention, Kauai making that announcement of a tiered system, Tier 2, I believe, is when they would opt out of that system. We're going to get more information on that and speak directly with the mayor of Kauai on Monday. Mayor Derek Kawakami will be joining us live here on Spotlight Hawaii to talk more about this tier program and the island's approach into reopening and how they are going to be included in this state's plans. We look forward to that conversation. We also have some other exciting guests coming next week as well.
Yeah, that's right. One of the industries that will be impacted by the arrival of all these visitors, of course, is the restaurant industry. A lot of these restaurants rely on tourism dollars to stay afloat, and they have missed those for many, many months now. So we'll be talking with Greg Maples. He is the Hawaii Restaurant Association chairman, and he'll be telling us how the restaurant industry is doing. You know, we've heard some projections of, you know, the majority of restaurants closing in Hawaii if the lockdowns continue. So what is the state of restaurants and how are these folks surviving? We'll be talking to Mr. Maples on Wednesday. And then Friday, something that could change all of this, of course, is rapid testing. So Pat Sullivan from Oceanet, they have developed Assure 19. It is a rapid saliva test, very inexpensive. And so we're going to talk to him about that. It is not widely available just yet. They are still trying to get full approval, but it's something that's being developed right here in the islands, and it could be a game changer when it comes to bringing industry back, not just tourism, but really overall. We could see it used in schools, we could see it used in workplaces, so we're excited to talk to him as well.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are sort of all eyes on that organization and that company as they sort of move through this process because as you said, it will likely be a game changer. And so waiting for those approval process and what happens if that does get approved, how will that impact the state and how soon could we see those tests become available to the general public? We'll be having those conversations again happening next week. But again, we want to thank all of you for your comments and for continuing to log in on Monday and Wednesday, Friday to Spotlight Hawaii. Of course, we also want to thank our sponsors, the Office of Elections, for allowing us to have this conversation.
That's right. So make sure if you got that ballot, fill it out, send it back. If you have any questions, of course, you can head to their website, elections.hawaii.gov. If you feel more comfortable, there will be drop-off locations, so you can actually drop your ballot into a ballot box as opposed to sending in a mailbox. But we are well away from the election, so you have plenty of time for it to get there. The deadline to put it in the mail, the suggested deadline rather, is October 27th. So if you have a ballot in your hands, like we do, Ryan, fill it out and send it off as soon as you can.
That's right. Until next week, Monday at 10:30, we wish you all a very safe weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Spotlight Hawaii. Aloha.
For this year's general election, registered voters need to watch for their ballots arriving by mail in mid-October.
Following the instructions, seal your ballot in the envelope provided and be sure to sign the back.
Envelopes without your signature will not be accepted.
Look for your free elections guide in the newspaper or at these locations statewide.
There are no polling places.
So be sure to mail your ballot by October 27th.
Hawaii votes by mail.